right. So, where did we leave off? So we left off at the end of chapter 8. Howl had been meeting Letty. Sophie went there with Michael, and then they met, forgotten her name, but that old woman, the witch who was teaching Letty. Michael found out that Martha is Letty, that he knew is actually Martha, and that they are both related to Sophie. Hal had another tantrum, a mini one, and that's where we were at. I think that was the last thing that happened. Oh no! So where we left off, the Port Haven door was about to open. So someone has come knocking. So, chapter 9, in which Michael has trouble with a spell. It was the sea captain at the door, come for his wind spell at last, and not at all pleased at having to wait. If I miss my tide, boy, he said to Michael, I shall have a word with the sorcerer about you. I don't like lazy boys. Michael, in Sophie's opinion, was far too polite to him, but she was feeling too dejected to interfere. When the captain had gone, Michael went to the bench to frown over his spell again, and Sophie sat silently mending her stockings. She had only the one pair, and her knobby feet had worn huge holes in them. Her grey dress by this time was frayed and dirty. She wondered whether she dared cut the least stained bits out of Hal's ruined blue and silver suit to make herself a new skirt with, but she did not quite dare. Sophie, Michael said, looking up from his 11th page of notes, how many nieces have you? Sophie had been afraid Michael would start asking questions. When you get to my age, my lad, she said, you lose count. They all look so alike. Those two Lettys could be twins to my mind. Oh no, not really, Michael said, to her surprise. The niece in upper folding isn't as pretty as my Letty. He tore up the 11th page and made a 12th. I'm glad Hal didn't meet my Letty, he said. He began on his 13th page and tore that up too. I wanted to laugh when that Mrs. Fairfax said she knew who Hal was, didn't you? No, said Sophie. It had made no difference to Letty's feelings. She thought of Letty's bright, adoring face under the apple blossom. I suppose there's no chance, she asked hopelessly, that Hal could be properly in love this time. Calcifer snorted green sparks up the chimney. I was afraid you'd start thinking that, Michael said. But you'd be deceiving yourself just like Mrs. Fairfax. How do you know? Said Sophie. Calcifer and Michael exchanged glances. Did he forget to spend at least an hour in the bathroom this morning? Michael asked. He was in there 2 hours, said Calcifer, putting spells on his face. Vain fool. There you are then, said Michael. The day Hal forgets to do that will be the day I believe he's really in love, and not before. Sophie thought of Hal on one knee in the orchard, posing to look as handsome as possible, and she knew they were right. She thought of going to the bathroom and tipping all Hal's beauty spells down the toilet, but she did not quite dare. Instead, she hobbled up and fetched the blue and silver suit, which she spent the rest of the day cutting little blue triangles out of in order to make a patchwork sort of skirt. Michael patted her shoulder kindly as he came to throw all 17 pages of his notes onto Calcifer. Everyone gets over things in the end, you know, he said. But this time it was clear Michael was having trouble with his spell. He gave up the notes and scraped some soot off the chimney. Calcifer... I don't know if you can hear that, but my cat is yowling at me. Sorry. Started yowling and aggressively, attacking the floor. She's been very needy for attention. Yeah. Sorry, and hello, everyone. Are you a story writer? In my spare time, kind of, yes. We're not reading one of mine today, though. We are reading Howl's Moving Castle. If we're lucky, Cos will come over and sit on my lap and we'll get to see her. But anyway, continuing. Sorry for the interruption. By this time it was clear Michael was having trouble with his spell. He gave up the notes and scraped some soot off the chimney. Calcifer craned round to watch him in a mystified way. Michael took a withered root from one of the bags hanging on the beams and put it in the soot. Then, after much thought, he turned the doorknob, blew down, and vanished for 20 minutes into Port Haven. He came back with a large whirled seashell and put that with the root and the soot. After that, he tore up pages and pages of paper and put those in too. He put the lot in the front of the human skull and stood blowing on it, so that soot and bits of paper whirled all over the bench. What's he doing, do you think? Calcifer asked Sophie. Michael gave up blowing and started mashing everything, paper and all, with a pestle and mortar, looking at the skull expectantly from time to time. Nothing happened, so he tried different ingredients from bags and jars. I feel bad about spying on Howl, he announced as he pounded a third set of ingredients to death in a bowl. He may be fickle to females, but he's been awfully good to me. He took me in when I was just an unwanted orphan sitting on his doorstep in Port Haven. How did that come about? Asked Sophie, as she snipped out another blue triangle. My mother died and my father got drowned in a storm, Michael said. And nobody wants you when that happens. I had to leave our house because I couldn't pay rent, and I tried to live on the streets, but people kept turning me off doorsteps and out of boats until the only place I could think of to go was somewhere everyone was too scared to interfere with. Hal had just started up in a small way as Sorcerer Jenkins back then, but everyone said his house had devils in it, so I slept on his doorstep for a couple of nights till Hal opened the door one morning on his way to buy bread, and I fell inside. So he said I could wait indoors while he got something to eat. I went in, and there was Calcifer, and I started talking to him because I'd never met a demon before. What did you talk about? Said Sophie, wondering if Calcifer had asked Michael to break his contract too. He told me his troubles and dripped on me, didn't you? Said Calcifer. He didn't seem to occur to him that I might have troubles as well. I don't think you have. You just grumble a lot, Michael said. You were quite nice to me that morning, and I think Hal was impressed. But you know how he is. He didn't tell me I could stay. He just didn't tell me to go. So I started being useful wherever I could, like looking after money so that he didn't spend it all as soon as he got it, and so on. The spell gave a sort of woof, then and exploded mildly. Michael brushed soot off the skull, sighing, and tried new ingredients. Sophie began making a patchwork of blue triangles round her feet on the floor. I did make lots of stupid mistakes when I first started, Michael went on. Hal was awfully nice about it. I thought I'd got over that now, and I think I do help with money. Hal buys such expensive clothes. He says no one's going to employ a wizard who looks as if he can't make money at the trade. That's just because he likes clothes, said Calcifer. His orange eyes watched Sophie at work rather meaningly. This suit was spoiled, Sophie said. It isn't just clothes, Michael said. Remember last winter when we were down to our last log and Hal went off and bought the skull and that stupid guitar? I was really annoyed with him. He said they looked good. What did you do about logs? Sophie asked. Hal conjured some from someone who owed him money, Michael said. At least, he said they did, and I just hoped he was telling the truth. And we ate seaweed. Hal says it's good for you. Nice stuff, murmured Calcifer. Dry and crackly. I hate it, said Michael, staring abstractedly at his bowl of pounded stuff. I don't know. There should be 7 ingredients, unless it's 7 processes. Let's try it in a pentacle anyway. He put the bowl on the floor and chalked a sort of 5-pointed star around it. The powder exploded with a force that blew Sophie's triangles into the hearth. Michael swore and hurriedly rubbed on the chalk marks. Sophie, he said, I'm stuck in this spell. You don't think you could possibly help me, do you? Just like someone bringing their homework to their granny, Sophie thought, collecting triangles and patiently laying them out again. Let's have a look, she said cautiously. I don't know anything about magic, you know. Michael eagerly thrust a strange, slightly shiny paper into her hand. It looked unusual. Even for a spell, it was printed in bold letters, but they were slightly grey and blurred, and there were grey blurs like retreating storm clouds round all the edges. See what you think, said Michael. Sophie read, Go and catch a falling star. Get with child a mandrake root. Tell me where all past years are, or who cleft the devil's foot. Teach me to hear the mermaids singing, or to keep off envy's stinging, and find what wind serves to advance an honest mind. Decide what this is about. Write a second verse yourself. It puzzled Sophie exceedingly. It was not quite like any of the spells she had snooped at before. She ploughed through it twice, not really helped by Michael eagerly explaining as she tried to read. You know, Howl told me that advanced spells have a puzzle in them. Well, I decided at first that every line was meant to be a puzzle. I used soot with sparks in it for the falling star, and a seashell for the mermaid singing, and I thought I might count as a child, so I got a mandrake root down. And I wrote out lists with past years from the almanacs, but I wasn't sure about that. Maybe that's where I went wrong. And could the thing that stopped stinging be dockleaf? I hadn't thought of that before. Anyway, none of it works. I'm not surprised, said Sophie. It looks to me like a set of impossible things to do. But Michael was not having that. If the things were impossible, he pointed out reasonably, no one would ever be able to do the spell. And, he added, I'm so ashamed of spying on Howl that I want to make up for it by getting this spell right. Very well, said Sophie. Let's start with, decide what this is about. That ought to start things moving, if deciding it is part of the spell anyway. But Michael was not having that either. No, he said. It's the sort of spell that reveals itself as you do it. That's what the last line means. When you write the second half, saying what the spell means, that makes it work. Those kind are very advanced. We have to crack the first bits first. Oh, what's tonight's drink of choice? Just tea today. I have an assignment I need to finish, and I don't need whiskey for that. But Sunday, I don't have any assignments due the next day, so. And Bug bought more Fireball, so we have more whiskey. You beg to differ. Well, sometimes I did smash out an assignment on like half a bottle of wine once, and I passed. I think that's what really matters. I actually did really well on that assignment. But also, my teacher's kind of cool. Back to it. Sophie collected her blue triangles into a pile again. Let's ask Calcifer, she suggested. Calcifer, who? But this was yet another thing Michael did not let her do. No, be quiet. I think Calcifer's part of the spell. Look at the way it says, tell me and teach me. I thought at first it meant teach the skull, but that didn't work. So it must be Calcifer. You can do it by yourself if you sit on everything I have to say, Sophie said. Anyway, surely Calcifer must know who cleft his own foot. Calcifer flared up a little at this. I haven't got any feet. I'm a demon, not a devil. Saying which he retreated right under his logs, where he could be heard clinking about, muttering. Lot of nonsense. All the rest of the time, Sophie and Michael were discussing the spell. By this time, the puzzle had got a grip on Sophie. She packed away her blue triangles, fetched pen and paper, and started making notes in the same sort of quantities that Michael had. For the rest of the day, she and Michael sat staring into the distance, nibbling quills and throwing out suggestions at one another. An average page of Sophie's notes read, Does garlic keep off envy? I could cut a star out of paper and drop it. Could we tell it to Howl? Howl would like mermaids better than Calcifer. Do not think Howl's mind honest. Is Calcifer's where are past years anyway? Does it mean one of those dry roots must bear fruit? Planted? Next to dockleaf? In seashell? Cloven hoof, most things but horses. Chew a horse with a clove of garlic. Wind? Smell? Wind of 7-league boots? Is Howl devil? cloven toes in 7-league boots, mermaids in boots. Sophie's so cute. None of that makes sense. As Sophie wrote this, Michael asked equally desperately, could the wind be some sort of pulley? An honest man being hanged? That's black magic enough. Let's have supper, said Sophie. They ate bread and cheese, still staring into distance. In what it says? Okay. At last, Sophie said, Michael, for goodness sake, let's give up guessing and try doing just what it says. Where's the best place to catch a shooting star? Out on the hills? Port Haven marshes are flatter, Michael said. Can we? Shooting stars go awfully fast. So can we in 7-league boots, Sophie pointed out. Michael sprang up, full of relief and delight. I think you've got it, he said, scrambling for the boots. Let's go and try. This time, Sophie prudently took her stick and her shawl, since it was now quite dark. Michael was turning the doorknob blue down when two strange things happened. On the bench, the teeth of the skull started clattering, and Calcifer blazed right up the chimney. I don't want you to go, he said. We'll be back soon, Michael said soothingly. They went out into the street in Port Haven. It was a bright, balmy night. As soon as they had reached the end of the street, however, Michael remembered that Sophie had been ill that morning and began worrying about the effect of the night air on her health. So Sophie told him not to be silly. She stumped gamely along with her stick until they left the lighted windows behind and the night became wide and damp and chilly. The marshes smelled of salt and earth. The sea glittered and softly swished to the rear. Sophie could feel more than see the miles and miles of flatness stretching away in front of them. What she could see were bands of low bluish mist and pails of glimmers of marshy pools over and over again, until they built into a pale line where the sky started. The sky was everywhere else, huger still. The Milky Way looked like a band of mist risen from the marshes, and the keen stars twinkled through it. Michael and Sophie stood, each with a boot ready on the ground in front of them, waiting for one of the stars to move. How cute. Hi, Amia. No, that is not Bug. Originally, I thought Pippa was Lockie, the other bishop. No, I think that's from a TikTok, right, Pippa? Yes. A TikTok or a Vine or something? Yeah. After about an hour, Sophie had to pretend she was not shivering for fear of worrying Michael. Half an hour later, Michael said, May is not the right time of year. August or November is best. Half an hour after that, he said in a worried way, What do we do about the mandrake root? Let's see to this part before we worry about that, Sophie said, biting her teeth together while she spoke, for fear they would chatter. Sometime later, Michael said, You go home, Sophie. It's my spell after all. Sophie had her mouth open to say that this was a very good idea, when one of the stars came unstuck from the firmament and darted in a white streak down the sky. There's one, Sophie shrieked instead. Michael thumped his foot in his boot and was off. Sophie braced herself with her stick and was off a second later. Zip, squash. Down far out in the marshes with mist and emptiness and dull glimmering pools in all directions. Sophie stabbed her stick into the ground and managed to stand still. Michael's boot was a dark blot standing just beside her. Michael himself was a sploshy sound of madly running feet somewhere ahead. And there was the falling star. Sophie could see it, a little white descending flame shape a few yards beyond the dark movements that were Michael. The bright shape was coming down slowly now, and it looked as if Michael might catch it. Sophie dragged her shoe out of the boot. Come on, Stick, she crowed. Get me there. And she set off at a top hobble, leaping across tussocks and staggering through pools with her eyes on that little white light. By the time she caught up, Michael was stalking the star with soft steps, both arms out to catch it. Sophie could see him outlined against the star's light. The star was drifting level with Michael's hands, and only a step or so beyond. It was looking back at him nervously. How odd, Sophie thought. It was made of light. It lit up a white ring of grass and reeds and black pools round Michael, and yet it had big, anxious eyes peering backward at Michael and a small, pointed face. Sophie's arrival frightened it. It gave an erratic swoop and cried out in a shrill, crackling voice. What is it? What do you want? Sophie tried to say to Michael, Do stop, it's terrified, but she had no breath left to speak with. I only want to catch you, Michael explained. I won't hurt you. No, no, the star crackled desperately. That's wrong. I'm supposed to die. But I could save you if you'd let me catch you, Michael told it gently. No, cried the star. I'd rather die. It dived away from Michael's fingers. Michael plunged for it, but it was too quick for him. It swooped for the nearest marsh pool, and the black water leaped in a blaze of whiteness for just an instant. Then there was a small dying sizzle. When Sophie hobbled over, Michael was standing, watching the last light fade out of a little round lump under the dark water. That was sad, Sophie said. Michael sighed. Yes, my heart sort of went out to it. Let's go home. I'm sick of this spell. It took them 20 minutes to find the boots. Sophie thought it was a miracle they found them at all. You know, Michael said, as they trudged dejectedly through the dark streets of Port Haven. I can tell I'll never be able to do this spell. It's too advanced for me. I shall have to ask Howl. I hate giving in, but at least I'll get some sense out of Howl now this Letty Hat has given in to him. This did not cheer Sophie up at all. That was sad. Oh. But, very nicely written. It is Vine. Okay. I knew it was from something. I recognize it from somewhere. Okay. Does everyone remember that scene from the movie? No spoilers in the chat in case anyone watched it. It's a very pretty scene. Amir, you haven't watched it? Well, no spoilers. We're not going to say anything. Chapter 10. Yeah, we've watched it heaps of. I've watched it with you a few times, Sophie. Amir, we'll watch it together once this is done. Once I finish reading. I've got a picture of the stars in front of me. It's on one of my Howl's Moving Castle box set things, which I can't show because it's holding up my tea. Maybe later. I was considering Howl tattoo, and that one's pretty. Anyway, some vegetables. Yeah, maybe, Amir. We'll see. Chapter 10, in which Calcifer promises Sophie a hint. Hal must have come back while Sophie and Michael were out. He came out of the bathroom while Sophie was frying breakfast on Calcifer, and sat gracefully in the chair, groomed and glowing and smelling of honeysuckle. Yes, Sophie, he said, always busy. You were hard at work yesterday, weren't you, in spite of my advice? Why have you made a jigsaw puzzle of my best suit? Just a friendly inquiry, you know. You jellied it the other day, said Sophie. I'm making it over. I can do that, said Howl. I thought I showed you. I can also make you a pair of 7-league boots of your own if you gave me your size. Something practical, in brown calf perhaps. It's amazing the way one can take a step 10.5 miles long and still always land in a cow pat. It may have been a bull pat, said Sophie. I dare say you found mud from the marshes on them too. A person my age needs a lot of exercise. You were even busier than I realized then, said Howl, because when I happened to tear my eyes from Letty's lovely face for an instant yesterday, I could have sworn I saw your long nose poking around the corner of the house. Mrs. Fairfax is a family friend, said Sophie. How was I to know you would be there too? You have an instinct, Sophie, that's how, said Howl. Nothing is safe from you. If I were to court a girl who lived on an iceberg in the middle of an ocean, sooner or later, probably sooner, I'd look up to see you swooping overhead on a broomstick. In fact, by now I'd be disappointed in you if I didn't see you. Pippa, how many drinks is that? What, 2? For those who don't know, Pippa was going to take a drink every time Howl was a dick, which is every time Howl speaks at this point in the book. Are you off to the iceberg today? Sophie retorted. From the look on Letty's face yesterday, there's nothing that need keep you there. You wrong me, Sophie, Howl said. He sounded deeply injured. Sophie looked suspiciously sideways. Beyond the red jewel swinging in Howl's ear, his profile looked sad and noble. Long years will pass before I leave Letty, he said, and in fact, I'm off to see the king again today. Satisfied, Mrs. Nose? Sophie was not sure she believed a word of this, though it was certainly to Kingsbury with the doorknob red down that Howl departed after breakfast, waving Michael aside when Michael tried to consult him about the perplexing spell. Michael, since he had nothing to do, left too. He said he might as well go to Cesari's. Sophie was left alone. She still did not truly believe what that Howl said about Letty, but she had been wrong about him before, and she had only Michael and Calcifer's word for Howl's behaviour after all. She collected up all the little blue triangles of cloth and began guiltily sewing them back into the silver fishing net, which was all that was left of the suit. When someone knocked at the door, she started violently, thinking it was the Scarecrow again. Port Haven door, Calcifer said, flickering a purple grin at her. That should be all right then. Sophie hobbled over and opened it, blew down. There was a cart horse outside. The young fellow of 50, who was leading it, wondered if Mrs. Witch had something which might stop it casting shoes all the time. I'll see, said Sophie. She hobbled over to the grate. What shall I do? She whispered. Yellow powder, 4th jar along on the 2nd shelf, Calcifer whispered back. Those spells are mostly belief. Don't look uncertain when you give it to him. So Sophie poured yellow powder into a square of paper as she had seen Michael do, twisted it smartly, and hobbled to the door with it. There you are, my boy, she said. That'll stick the shoes on harder than any 100 nails. You hear me, horse? You don't need a smith for the next year. That'll be a penny, thank you. It was quite a busy day. Sophie had to put down her sewing and sell, with Calcifer's help, a spell to unblock drains, another to fetch goats, and something to make good beer. The only one that gave her any trouble was the customer who pounded on the door in Kingsbury. Sophie opened it, read down to find a richly dressed boy not much older than Michael, white-faced and sweating, wringing his hands on the doorstep. Hello. And the whole point is reading. So, I'm not going to really stop reading very often, only for tea breaks. I don't think so. Anyway, Madam Sorceress, for pity's sake, he said, I have to fight a duel at dawn tomorrow. Give me something to make sure I win. I'll pay any sum you ask. Sophie looked over her shoulder at Calcifer, and Calcifer made faces back, meaning that there was no such thing ready-made. That wouldn't be right at all, Sophie told the boy severely. Besides, dueling is wrong. Then just give me something that lets me have a fair chance, the lad said desperately. Sophie looked at him. He was very undersized and clearly in a great state of fear. He had that hopeless look a person has who always loses at everything. I'll see what I can do, Sophie said. She hobbled over to the shelves and scanned the jars. The red one, labelled Cayenne, looked the most likely. Sophie poured a generous heap of it on a square of paper. She stood the human skull beside it. Because you must know more about this than I do, he muttered at it. The young man was leaning anxiously round the door to watch. Sophie took up a knife and made what she hoped would look like mystic passes over the heap of pepper. You are to make it a fair fight, she mumbled. A fair fight, understand? She screwed the paper up and hobbled to the door with it. Throw this in the air when the duel starts, she told the undersized young man. and it will give you the same chance as the other man. After that, whether you win or not depends on you." The undersized young man was so grateful that he tried to give her a gold piece. Sophie refused to take it, so he gave her a 2-penny bit instead and went away whistling happily. "I feel a fraud," Sophie said, as she sewed the money under the hearthstone. "But I would like to be there at that fight." "So would I," cackled Calcifer. "When are you going to release me so that I can go and see things like that?" "When I've got even a hint about this contract," Sophie said. "You may get one later today," said Calcifer. Michael breezed in toward the end of the afternoon. He took an anxious look around to make sure Hal had not come home first and went to the bench, where he got things out to make it look as if he had been busy, singing cheerfully while he did. "I envy you being able to walk all that way so easily," Sophie said, sewing a blue triangle to silver braid. "How is, my niece?" Michael gladly left the workbench and sat on the stool by the hearth to tell her all about his day. Then he asked about Sophie's. The result was that when Hal shouldered the door open with his arms full of parcels, Michael was not even looking busy. He was rolling around on the stool, laughing at the jewel spell. Hal backed into the door to shut it and leaned there in a tragic attitude. "Look at you all," he said. "Ruin stares me in the face. I slave all day for you all, and not one of you, even Calcifer, can spare time to say hello." Michael sprang up guiltily, and Calcifer said, "I never do say hello." "Is something wrong?" asked Sophie. "That's better," said Hal. "Some of you are pretending to notice me at last. How kind of you to ask, Sophie. Yes, something is wrong. The king has asked me officially to find his brother for him, with a strong hint that destroying the Witch of the Waste would come in handy too. And you all sit there and laugh." By now it was clear that Hal was in a mood to produce green slime any second. Sophie hurriedly put her sewing away. "I'll make some hot buttered toast," she said. "Is that all you can do in the face of tragedy?" Hal asked. "Make toast? No, don't get up. I've trudged here laden with stuff for you, so the least you can do is show polite interest. Here." He tipped a shower of parcels into Sophie's lap and handed another to Michael. He's such a brat. But still, he's very fun to read. Mystified, Sophie unwrapped things: several pairs of silk stockings, 2 parcels of the finest cambric petticoats, flounces, lace, and satin insets, a pair of elastic-sided boots in dove grey suede, a lace shawl, and a dress of grey watered silk trimmed with lace that matched the shawl. Sophie took one professional look at each and gasped. The lace alone was a fortune. She stroked the silk of the dress, awed. Michael unwrapped a handsome new velvet suit. "You must have spent every bit that was in the silk purse," he said ungratefully. "I don't need this. You're the one who needs a new suit." Hal hooked his boot into what remained of the blue and silver suit and held it up ruefully. Sophie had been working hard, but it was still more whole than suit. "How selfless I am," he said. "But I can't send you and Sophie to blacken my name to the king in rags. The king would think I didn't look after my old mother properly. Well, Sophie, are the boots the right size?" He's so selfish. He is so selfish. I could do with some buttered toast as well. I'm out of bread though. I haven't had bread in like a week. And I'm not like in isolation mode where where I can make bread. Are we all out of bread? I suppose. Are you also? Oh yeah, you what? Pippa? Okay. Everyone's out of bread. Who can make bread? Someone should make bread for me. Sophie looked up from her awed stroking. "Are you being kind," she said, "or cowardly?" "Thank you very much, and no, I won't." "What ingratitude!" Howl exclaimed, spreading out both arms. "Let's have green slime again, after which I shall be forced to move the castle 1,000 miles away and never see my lovely Letty again." Michael looked at Sophie imploringly. Sophie glowered. You saw well enough that the happiness of both her sisters depended on her agreeing to see the king, with green slime in reserve. You haven't asked me to do anything yet, she said. You've just said I'm going to. Hal smiled. And you are going to, aren't you? All right. When do you want me to go? Sophie said. Tomorrow afternoon, said Hal. Michael can go as your footman. The king's expecting you. He sat on the stool and began explaining very clearly and soberly just what Sophie was to say. There was no trace of the green slime mood now things were going Hal's way, Sophie noted. She wanted to slap him. I want you to do a very delicate job, Hal explained, so that the king will go on giving me work like the transport spells, but not trust me with anything like finding his brother. You must tell him how I've angered the Witch of the Waste, and explain what a good son I am to you. But I want you to do it in such a way that he'll understand I'm really quite useless. Hal explained in great detail. Sophie clasped her hands round the parcels and tried to take it all in, but she could not help thinking, if I was the king, I wouldn't understand a word of what the old woman was driving at. Michael, meanwhile, was hovering at Hal's elbow, trying to ask him about the perplexing spell. Hal kept thinking of new, delicate details to tell the king and waving Michael away. Not now, Michael. And it occurred to me, Sophie, that you might want some practice in order not to find the palace overwhelming. We don't want you coming over queer in the middle of the interview. Not yet, Michael. So I arranged for you to pay a call to my old tutor, Mrs. Penstamen. She's a grand old thing. In some ways, she's grander than the king. You'll be quite used to that kind of thing by the time you get to the palace. By this time, Sophie was wishing she had never agreed. She was heartily relieved when Howl at last turned to Michael. Right, Michael, your turn now. What is it? Michael waved the shiny grey paper and explained, in an unhappy rush, how impossible the spell seemed to do. Hal seemed faintly astonished to hear this, but he took the paper, saying, Now, where was your problem? And spread it out. He stared at it. One of his eyebrows shot up. I tried it as a puzzle, and I tried doing it just as it says, Michael explained, but Sophie and I couldn't catch the falling star. Great gods above, Hal exclaimed. He started to laugh and bit his lip to stop himself. But Michael, this isn't the spell I left you. Where did you find it? On the bench, in that heap of things Sophie piled around the skull, said Michael. It was the only new spell there, so I thought. Hal leaped up and sorted among the things on the bench. Sophie strikes again, he said. Things skidded right and left as he searched. I might have known. No, the proper spell's not here. He tapped the skull thoughtfully on its brown, shiny dome. You're doing, friend? I have a notion you come from there. I'm sure the guitar does. Sophie, dear. What? Said Sophie. Busy old fool. Unruly Sophie, said Hal. Am I right in thinking that you turned my doorknob black side down and stuck your long nose out through it? Just my finger, Sophie said with dignity. But you opened the door, said Hal. And the thing Michael thinks is a spell must have got through. Didn't it occur to either of you that it doesn't look like spells usually do? Spells often look peculiar, Michael said. What is it really? Hal gave a snort of laughter. Decide what this is about. Write a second verse. Oh, Lord, he said, and ran for the stairs. I'll show you, he called as his feet pounded up them. I think we wasted our time rushing around the marshes last night, Sophie said. Michael nodded gloomily. Sophie could see he was feeling a fool. It was my fault, she said. I opened the door. What was outside? Michael asked with great interest. But Hal came charging downstairs just then. I haven't got that book after all, he said. He seemed upset now. Michael, did I hear you say you went out and tried to catch a shooting star? Yes, but it was scared stiff and fell in a pool and drowned, Michael said. Thank goodness for that, said Hal. It was very sad, Sophie said. Sad, was it? Said Hal, more upset than ever. It was your idea, was it? It would be. I can just see you hopping about the marshes, encouraging him. Let me tell you, that was the most stupid thing he's ever done in his life. It'd have been more than sad if he'd chanced to catch the thing, and you. Calcifer flickered sleepily up the chimney. What's all this fuss about? He demanded. You caught one yourself, didn't you? Yes, and I, Hal began, turning his glass marble glare on Calcifer. But he pulled himself together and turned to Michael instead. Michael, promise me you'll never try to catch one again. I promise, Michael said willingly. What is that writing, if it's not a spell? Hal looked at the grey paper in his hand. It's called Song, and that's what it is, I suppose. But it's not all here, and I can't remember the rest of it. He stood and thought, as if a new idea had struck him, one which obviously worried him. I think the next verse was important, he said. I'd better take it back and see. He went to the door and turned the knob black down, then he paused. He looked round at Michael and Sophie, who were naturally enough both staring at the knob. All right, he said. I know Sophie will squirm through somehow if I leave her behind, and that's not fair to Michael. Come along, both of you, so I've got you where I can keep my eye on you. He opened the door on the nothingness and walked into it. Michael fell over the stool in his rush to follow. Sophie shed parcels right and left in the hearth as she sprang up too. Don't let get any sparks get on those, she said hurriedly to Calcifer. If you promise to tell me what's out there, Calcifer said. You had your hint, by the way. Did I? Said Sophie. She was in too much of a hurry to attend. And we have finished chapter 10. 10 chapters in. You will make me a loaf. You're going to make me a loaf of bread? I would love that. I love most loaves. But you don't have to do that, Pippa. I do love bread. It's so nice reading this and like seeing the differences to the film and the different choices that Miyazaki made. It's just very interesting. Also just the characters and knowing what's going to happen next. Kind of knowing. I mean, I've read it before, but like a long time ago. We have finished those 2 chapters very early. I think because I didn't pause as much to read the chat and I just smashed it out. But I'm happy to hang out and chat for a little while if you guys wanted to. You would like to see the live action closer to the book? I would too. Did you hear Cosette? I don't know if she's close enough to the mic, but she's yelling again. She's being incredibly needy. She was like asleep on my foot for half of this. I'm really looking forward to seeing what is on the other side of the door next chapter and how different that will be. Because Michael doesn't go with them in the film. And it happens much later. So this is pretty. Needy cats are better than the mean ones. Yes, that's true. She's very soft and kind. The lovely cat. She's also very sleepy. And offended that I keep moving. You had a cat that terrified your dogs and seemed to feed off their energy when they died. Wow. That is awful. See if I can bring. Hello. Cat. Good girl. Bye. That was Cosette. Everyone who hasn't met her before or seen her face on my Instagram. You love her? She is very lovable. She's offended that I picked her up, though. Better than your vampire cat. Mm. I know, she's anytime you touch her and she's not prepared for it, she'll lick all over the spot that she was. Oh, Anne, you're here. Hello. She's not evil. She likes you. She just likes Wen a bit more. Got cat fur all over my laptop. Okay. Well, we did finish a little early, but okay. Someone told me that I should plug things at the end of this, but I don't have anything to plug really. I don't know. Follow me on my socials. I have a Ko-fi. Which I might buy a headset for. So I was considering doing games as well. How do you guys feel about me playing some games? What was my writing I was talking about? Oh, someone in the chat asked me if I write. You don't know that I write? Did you not know at all, Meg? Yeah, no, I write. Short stories, poems, bunch of stuff. I've been writing since I was a little kid. Sometimes I post the poems to my Instagram, and I have a writing blog. I don't really post many of the stories there just because I have a book intention in the future and I just don't want to put any of it out there yet. My gameplays would be great. Yes, play games. Yeah. I'll have to think about it because I've never streamed games before. I was thinking of doing it through the PlayStation because my laptop is weak. It's struggling through this even. I don't know if you guys can hear the fan. I can. Loud. But yeah, if anyone wants to donate to the Ko-fi or follow my socials, the links should be under this video. Except for Pippa. Pippa's not allowed to donate to my Ko-fi. You're being blocked. Otherwise, if you want to look at my writing blog, it is linked on my Instagram. I didn't think to link it here. So at the moment, it's linked on my Instagram. Or no, wait, no, it's not on my Instagram. It's on my Twitter. Instagram has Twitch now. Okay. What's the eye emojis for, Pippa? Anyway, it was, as always, lovely hanging out with you and reading and learning more about Sophie and Howl and how their relationship develops. I'm sorry, she just keeps yelling. She's so loud today. Surprised you guys can't hear it. But I will see you all again on Sunday, which, yeah, Sunday. Love listening. Oh, thanks, Ree. And you are welcome. I love reading to you and hanging out. I will, when I'm we're about halfway. You have a look. About halfway through. When we get closer to the end, I will ask for suggestions of what to read next. I was thinking of maybe doing one stream a week of games and The other stream will be reading, maybe even just like one of my books of short stories. I've got a lot of spooky ones. How do you guys feel about spooky stories? 20-second delay. Hmm. I think I have, yeah, I've got 2 or 3 books of ghost stories and stuff. Ree, you're scared of spooky stories, so that's good. Anne would be against spooky stories. She might not be scared if it's just me reading. I don't think I'm particular. Maybe I could change the vibe. Maybe I could make it darker. Wear black or something. Listening to me read is great. Oh, so sweet. Need to make the lights flicker. Well, that was a problem with one of the streams last week. In the living room. So I don't know. Maybe that'd be a good vibe. Okay, well, thank you for coming, everybody. I think it's time we wrap it up. I will see you all Sunday. You are all welcome. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Bye bye.